someone would, let me try to load this again, where someone may time align this by hand, or they may use, or they've used Elastic Audio. Some of y'all may have seen this, a seminar I did way back in like March that was where we went over all the different types of editing, and we're kind of rehashing some of that tonight, but we're gonna be looking specifically at Beat Detective. Let me reload my YouTube video here so I can see y'all's questions. So let me do that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, Beat Detective can technically be used on any audio source that you want to use on, but if you don't have strong transients, it's kind of hard for it to pick up, because that's specifically what it is looking at when it's using this program. Okay, now I can see y'all's questions again when they come through. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Before we get into Beat Detective, we are going to talk about, so why would we time edit? So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at our drum tracks. So that's going to be the first thing that we're looking at. Most of the time when you're in Pro Tools, you're probably like on a half note or whole note mode. So I'm going to zoom in and kind of look at the grid here. And there is certain genres that may decide, like as we get into this, we'll go in and look at the timing here in just 1 second. But the first question is on Beat Detective is, why would we want to time edit our drums? So this has to do with if the drums are too far off of actually being on, if you're tracking to a metronome or a click where they're trying to stay completely onto that click and the rest of the band's going to be playing to that later, then we really want them to be on time. So if a drummer gets too far off of the grid or too far off of that click where he's dragging or pushing, which dragging means he's a little bit slower, pushing means he's going ahead of the beat. If he's doing any of those things, then sometimes you may need to time align it to get it back in with the song. Now, times when you might not want to time align stuff is when you have an entire band playing together. If you have drums, bass, and guitar all happening live in the session all at one time, there's times where you can get really good groove, or if these musicians are really playing off of each other really well, you may actually ruin the groove and the feel of the track by time editing it. So make sure before you're going to do time editing that it's something that either the artist wants for the song, or it's a genre or a type where you do need to time edit. So times that you would think that you would time edit, like specific, again, if it's just way too far off from the rest of the band and you need to tighten something up to bring the drummer back in to the timing with the band, then that's a time. Another one would be genre specific material, which if you're dealing with rock, like more like heavier rock and 100% in metal, and if you're using any other kind of timed MIDI stuff that's on a grid, these are all scenarios where you need to time edit your drums. So in metal and the hard rock stuff, you want to do it because it's all about everything hitting precisely at these very tight times, and having them all be super tight together is what makes it so punchy and what makes the genre be what it is, because everyone is so in time with each other in that. Now, if you're dealing in where you have drums that are going over other MIDI tracks that are on a grid or on a click, you need to time align the drums, because once you are using MIDI material that is on a grid and your drums aren't staying within the grid, that all that other stuff, like that, however many instruments you may have gridded in that scenario, then it's all going to sound off from each other. So that would be another scenario where you may need to do time editing. So just keep that in mind when the drums just get way too off from the band, if you need to be on the grid for the genre, or you are using other MIDI material that is on grid that it needs to match to. So those would be the main uses for why you would time edit. So let's just kind of take a little dive in here and just take a look at what we're looking at before we even go in and decide what our time editing is. So the first thing you always want to do, even after, if those of you who haven't tracked drums yet, or you get a session that someone sent you to work on, you always want to look, or if you're just mixing and it's a session you didn't record, you want to always look at what you actually have here in your session. So when I go look at my tracks here, it's like when I go look at, cool, I got 2 kicks, I got a kick in, kick out, snare top and bottom. I have 2 toms, hi-hat, ride, overheads, and then I have a pair of stereo rooms as well. So these are all the tracks that I have going on in this drum session right here. And typically this is what you're gonna see, is where you'll usually be at this kind of half grid. Now, when I'm looking at like this first verse here, we're gonna look at some simpler material for this, so you can really see how this works, because Some of the stuff where you have a bunch of tiny little notes, sometimes you really got to be methodical about those. A lot of genres do not have some of this like super fast movie stuff. Like you'll really see a lot of this, especially in rock and in any of the kind of math rock kind of genres, and then obviously any of the heavier kind of stuff, like some jazz, like if you have like the super intense kind of jazz, that's the more upbeat stuff, you can have lots of time. But that would be, jazz would be a style that I would never time edit, because their whole point is them playing off of each other and doing this kind of push-pull with their timings and part of their dynamics. That's just part of that genre. So learning the genres and the styles of music you're going to be recording or dealing with to know how to approach that is something that you definitely want to take into thought as well. But if we just kind of look at this, we're going to take a quick listen to the drums right here, and then we'll take a look at the timing here. So this drummer's grooving pretty good. On this, I just know we have lots of guitars that are matching with what it, on this, and on tonight I just isolated the drums in this session because tonight is specifically about Beat Detective, not about building out a whole session with this. So this is the kind of thing we're focusing in on, and that's why I've hidden the rest of the session, and we're not going to be looking at that tonight. But this you can, like, so if everything was grooving and you just had a click there to kind of keep them in time and everyone felt great and they were all playing together, then fantastic. There's no need to time edit something. But if I'm going in and this is something that we strictly talked with the band and our client and the client, or how we decided we need to make this song is to be on the grid, this is what we would do. So as I go in, you can already see, even on these initial notes that are like first kicks, they're slightly behind the actual grid line there. You can actually really, especially when I zoom in, you can really see this is the front of the transient right here. And so that's happening just a little bit behind the line. This guy's timing's pretty good because he's pretty close, but this is if we're trying to be exact. You can even see some of these kicks are just dead on, which is really nice. His snares are really close too. Some of this stuff, again, like when you're playing with the music, if everything's grooving together, some of this stuff kind of pushing and pulling gives the song character. So I want to specify you don't always need to time edit. So I just want to get that. I just want to make sure, because sometimes you can really take the feel out. So now the next thing, now that we've kind of looked in here, as we're going through this, what we want to start doing too is taking note of where all this time is and like where the notes are and what kind of timing we need to get. Before we do that though, the first thing we always need to do anytime you're working with a drum group, editing, whether you're doing it manually, through Elastic Audio, through Beat Detective, any kind of movement around of like an entire group like this where you have a drum kit, we need to make a group that connects to this whole thing. Now, I do groups for individual things underneath that, like kicks and snares and my overheads in my rooms, but you want to be able to make a group for this so you can control, because right now if I don't have the group on, like it's only going to grab the ones that are in these individual groups. But if I go turn my drum group on, anytime I click on any of these tracks, it's going to grab everything that's in the entire session, that's inside of that group. So to create tonight's, we have some other videos on there that you can see how to really dive in on everything on groups, but just a quick fast answer for everyone that's watching, if you don't know, to create a group, you want to select whatever tracks are there, so they're highlighted, all these ones that are white down here, Command G, and it opens up create group, and then you can name the group whatever you want it to be, and then click OK, and then it will make that group over here. Now I have already made a drum group before this, so it's already on, and now you can see when it's on because it shows the drums up there. So I have my drum group on. Anytime I'm grabbing that, that's the first thing we want to do, is make sure that anytime we're even, you can even see here when I zoom in on the session just a little bit, even the cursor goes all the way across your entire group, whatever you drag. So it lets you see exactly what all the information you want to see. Let me pull that a little tighter. Cool. Okay. So now the next thing after you've created your drum group, so this is, and you want to make this drum group whether you're editing, comping, like I said, anything that you're moving the entire group. Because if you're cutting anything like to move time-wise in drums, we have to cut the entire group because all these mics have bleed. There's no way around it when you're tracking, when you have that many mics on one source in a room, it's going to slightly pick up different elements of the kit in each of those mics. It may not be the major thing that it's seeing, like even in the snare, it slightly has a tiny little thing that's picking up the kick, but it's obviously nowhere near the size of what the actual snare hits are. But so you just always want to make sure that anytime because let's say you were looking at this track and you're like, oh, my snare is great, but my kick's off right here. Like if you just move the kick over, just the kick tracks, it's going to be way off because of the overheads down here that are picking it up, which are a big part of the drum sound. So like, because even when I listen, like this is the listen to the overheads. So if you just move the kick, now you're going to have this kind of like horse clop kind of thing, da-da, like kind of hit if you don't move the whole group as one. So we definitely want to make sure that we do that. Same thing with the rooms. And so that is, so that just on that front, just always make sure that you have the whole groups, every track that's inside your drum recording grouped up. Now, the next thing we want to do is now really looking at the time, because that's what I wanted to go into with y'all, is really, because now that we have where our grid is set, we can see we have notes and hits that are happening on these that are inside of the actual grid lines we have, right? So if I go up here and change my grid lines from half to a quarter, I still see it's lining up with some of the extra lines we have here, but I still have some faster kicks that are actually happening in there. So you'll hear he's doing this kind of soft little pre-kick before it goes into the other one. He's kind of doing that duh-duh. And that is actually happening on an eighth note. So we always want to count. We need to be paying attention to, so this is something for those of you who timing may not be as strong for you. This is something you're really going to have to pay attention to as you listen to because like you got to listen to the beat, and to some extent, if they're off, you have to know what they meant to play if they get that far off. So you need to start trying to get familiar with all your different note ranges of whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, sixteenths, getting into triplets, which triplets cover any of the range. We have quarter note triplets, eighth note triplets, 16th note triplets, and these are smaller. Each triplet version of those, like an eighth note triplet, is way faster than an actual eighth note. So just normally when you're thinking of triplets, you're usually thinking of them in the quarter note triplet sense, whenever, for just the most part, generally, whenever someone just says that, but there can be different types of triplets going on there too. So make sure you're really paying attention to your timing. And so what we want to do is we kind of want to look at this and kind of count whenever we're listening with this as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3. So I want to know, so now I know I have an and there. When I'm counting, that's how I always count eighth notes. Just even when I was teaching guitar and doing music theory stuff, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and then eighth notes 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. And then when I'm doing sixteenths, how I was always taught to do it and how I always teach anyone who's doing music stuff to do it is 1E and 2E and now those four notes are happening, the 1E and is happening just like the 1 and, but now you're adding the E and the in between those. So that's usually how I'm counting sixteenths and looking into that. So, but now we'll see what we're looking at here on this part, because we don't have any super fast notes in the verse here. So if I go to eighth note, now we see that this is very close to, to make sure nothing got sent back where I wanted it to. Okay. So we can see this is very close to the eighth note line, but it's just slightly dragging just a little bit behind the beat. So now that we've kind of looked in here and we see that, another thing you always want to do too, like at first, is just, making sure the main transients are there. If you have super bleed from other stuff, sometimes it can be really hard. That's why you want to try to, whenever you are tracking drums, you want to try to keep them as isolated as possible on each mic, so you can see what information is not supposed to be inside that mic. Like on my toms here, you can see his tom fills are happening in this big section here, and then these little hits that are happening here. But this other stuff's just a little bit of bleed, which normally if I was going in and doing a mix, I would likely gate out all of that stuff before, like besides the actual tom hits that are happening. So now, once we're, another thing to keep in mind too, because as you can see, this is even a rock song where he's busier than normal drums are. there's usually not like a million fills going on in every song. Like a drummer's not just going to be doing fills for the most part, because there's times they will be doing stuff like that that's crazy. But for the most part, they're doing drums like they're not going to do fills the whole time. So make sure you pay attention to where they do have fill sections, and usually I try to do those fill sections by themselves just because they're usually doing something faster or a little bit different timing that's adding in those toms. For the most part, you won't have any fills. You won't see many fills that aren't without the toms. You may see some snare rolls on some of these sections, like right in here, where they get kind of thick, because I can just tell that it's... So you can see, you see he's doing a bunch of snare hits right there. So now that we've talked about what you're looking at and how to set up your drums before you get going into Beat Detective, now we're going to actually dive into Beat Detective and open it. So there's two ways to reach this. I mean, the quick, super fast way, the hotkey, those of you who've had me know how much I'm talking about hotkeys, but it's command. Anytime I say numbers as well in Pro Tools, it's always going to be on your number pad. The numbers on the actual keyboard part don't do anything because that's just how they make it. So you really need a number pad to control everything on your hotkeys for Pro Tools. So if you are a Pro Tools user and you don't have a keyboard with a number pad, I would recommend buying one as soon as possible because it makes your life a lot easier. But we can easily open Beat Detective with Command 8 on there, and this is what it looks like. Now, if you can't remember the hotkey and you just want to be able to open it, it is in the Event tab up here, and then you have Beat Detective, and it actually shows you the hotkey right next to it, Command 8. And when you see this little square around these numbers, that lets you know it's the number pad. So this is what Beat Detective looks like. So we have an Operations tab, we have a Selection tab, and then we have this Detection tab over here. So we're going to go through each of these just so you can see what they do. For the most part, mainly when I'm using Beat Detective, I'm using it for clip separation, conform, and edit smoothing. But if you were we'll explain more about these two up here, and these would be specific uses that you would be using these for. So just you can also see too, when I switch through these, everything stays detection on the first three until we get to the clip conform. Then we have conform controls, and then we have smoothing controls on edit smoothing. So the last two, everything else in the middle stays the same with the clip conform and clip separation. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about before we just go in, and because I want y'all to see what each one of these does, just so you're familiar with it. Before I go completely dive into, actually, we will start right here. So bar and beat, bar/beat marker generation. What this does is this is going to detect the notes that the drummer is already playing, and it lets you create a custom tempo grid that is going to the timing, like his off timing for the rest of the band. So if you just, the way the drummer's playing, you love the way the drummer's playing and he sounds perfect. Like, I mean, on some of these, there's just things I would want to fix personally for the editing, just because a couple of the hits aren't completely like time correct, and some of them are a little bit jumpy. But if the guy was just grooving super good and everything feels great and you didn't want to take it off the grid, this is a way that you can do it, is use this bar beat generator. And I'm going to show you now. We do need to be in conductor mode when you are using this method, if you are going to use the bar beat marker generation. So for those of you who didn't know, there is two different tempo modes, and you can see it changing. There's like a manual tempo mode, and then there's a conductor tempo mode. Manual tempo mode, you can only have one tempo the entire time through the song, no matter what, can't ever change it. When you're in conductor mode, and when this little guy's lit up where it has the picture of the conductor, I can add new tempos anywhere I want and have as many tempo changes as you want in the song. So you can even see, even at the beginning, I believe, nope, on this one we didn't do a tempo change. I thought we might have done the intro at a different time, but we did not on this one. So I think we tried it at a different time and decided to stick with it whenever we did the original recording session. So make sure you are in conductor mode if you are going to be using the bar beat generator. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at that. Let me grab these section here. Let me get this back up. So now we have a selection section, which we need to hit this every time for what we are grabbing. So let me go ahead and do it. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you are grabbing the transients that you want for this beat selection option. So I'm just going to do everything that's within. I highly recommend using Beat Detective in sections as well. Like, I'm going to do verse 1 right here by itself. Like, nah, I'm not gonna do verse 1B yet. You probably could, but I'm gonna take it. But the only reason I may not, or I may go forward all the way to stop until I get to these fills, because the more fast notes you do, the more it can, depending on how off the drummer is, it can pull them to farther grid points than the original beat. So that's why you want to be very familiar with the beat before you go start moving it, in case it moves something so drastically that it doesn't sound like the actual timing he meant to do. So I hope all this is making sense, and hopefully once we get this in motion here, you'll see a little more and it'll make more sense with everything that I'm saying. I just want to make sure this ending part is. And as I move this sensitivity, it's going to start putting markers out here that are grabbing each individual transient that is in this selection. Now see how it's starting to pick up a ton of things. Like some of these I may not really want to move that far, where I really just want to make sure it's getting all my big notes that are in there. And now make sure whenever you, now do not, do whatever you can to not close. See what I just did right there was bad. Like I accidentally clicked my track there, so now I got to cancel what my analyze was and try it again, because I accidentally moved the section that I was using there. So that was my mistake. So that's actually a good lesson for y'all to see, because if you do that with Beat Detective open, you have to just kind of restart the process. So it is kind of, it's got its little quirks that you do have to work with, but just make sure that once you grab the selection, that's all you're doing at that point. So let me try this one more time. Just want to make sure everything's where I want it. Got my selection before I'm going to the transient there. Okay, so let me open that again. You can see the analyze again, but I'm actually just going to bring it back down, and I'm just going to recapture the selection so it's making sure it's C in the same spot. Then I'm going to press analyze again, and now we'll do our sensitivity. And I want these to, you see how I want those to grab each of these little hits that are going on in there. And just so you know, if there's one that's like, oh, this isn't picking up, you see how the hand shows up here. You can double click on a, man, why is this being so weird? Let me try this one more time. I'm not sure why this it's probably this mouse. I'm just not as used to this mouse. This is what I usually use. Let me go ahead and close Beat Detective, because I don't know why this is grabbing other selections and changing what I'm looking at. Because if I go in here, I can add a new click in there. So you see how I just clicked in there and it added a new note there. So like if I'm right there and I get the little click, I can click. Now I can actually grab this and move this if anything gets too far off from the transient, so I can actually set those up. Let's say there's a line that you see that's on there that you don't want. You can technically go in and put your hand on it, and you can press, like let's say I just put one here on this line that I don't even want. Now, if I pull the option while I'm touching that, you see it puts the minus next to the hand, right? Like right underneath the hand. Now I can actually remove a hit there. Now I want this to be actually on that clip, because I want that little pre-eighth note catch right there to show up in here. So you can kind of see, you kind of do have to go through and still double check your work a little bit, make sure it's catching every transient on the kick and the snares that you want. If you decide you do want to do everything on the hi-hat, you can do that, but I usually try to move the shells, and if you move the whole group with them, usually the cymbals stay grooving with the rest of what you're doing. So let me make sure I get all these. So that was the only other one that I didn't get. Cool. So now you can see, now that I've gone in and now I've made sure that every little beat has the line in front of the transient, so it's actually seeing all of those. So now that we have this captured, we have it analyzed where it's got all the parts that we want, we are good to go. So now the next thing I'm gonna, remember this is only if we're gonna use bar beat marker generation, so I'm gonna show you what this does right quick. So now when I press generate, it's gonna actually move, like, because it's like with guitars and bass, you gotta be pretty specific on how you're moving it so that it doesn't feel like you have because like the length and duration of their notes, if they're not held out properly or crossfaded properly, you can super hear the move that you did. But this is more for, like, this would be more for like percussion purposes. If you moved all the drums on the grid and you had like a perfectly timed tambourine or any kind of like clap or something that's going on, and then this can actually mold another section onto that grid. But what you'd have to do is, I don't want to go, this is kind of complicated, but I don't want to make it too crazy. You would want to use elastic audio and go to monophonic, and then I can open the quantize setting with option and 0. You can also reach this by going to event and event operations, and then there's quantize, but it's option 0 lets you bring it up. This is typically what this looks like when you open a quantize grid, but then you can actually go in and see there's an option to select groove clipboard. And then it's actually, now it's just lining this up with what we just looked at from that section. So like if I hit apply, you saw how it just actually moved that clip. Now I'll go to warp just so you can see what it actually did. Like if I go to warp here, you can see that it actually put these warps in there. It's probably gonna kind of sound goofy though. On this section, it actually came out. But now, I mean, actually on that, it actually worked really well on that section. On the intro section, it didn't do, it's like where they're doing those really fast parts, that's probably something if I was editing, I would do at the beginning where I have a bunch of those, like really, they're doing like these 16th note, like little spurts, and it's easier to control that manually just because they were a little bit farther off and the grid's not gonna pull it in tight. But you can see how this actually cut and moved that and just made this, and I used this for another track to just time align it to the drums. So you can do that sometimes, but just be very careful, because if you try to do everything on that, especially like guitars, it can really mess up what's going on there. So just keep that in mind. So that is the groove extraction, and that's and so that's where that sends it. It just saves to the groove clipboard. You can use it in the quantize settings, and that's what that would use. Now we're going to look at our, now we're going to look at our main function of what traditionally I use Beat Detective for and how I normally use it. As I said, these other two are for not taking it off where the drummer played. The rest of this is best for when we are going to be moving this off of the grid. So this is clip separation. Clip separation is exactly what it says. We're going to set these lines up, and when I press separate at the end of this, it's going to put a cut in here where all these lines are at. So let's go, I want to go in one more time, make sure I have all the lines at the places that I want them to be. So those are all picking up those transients. You can see I'm just doing a simple single click once the hand shows up. And then I just want to make sure it's on the front of the transient, and then we're good. Let me move this down because I want to make sure I'm catching all the, I know in this verse he doesn't do any toms, so I'm really just looking at my kicks and my snares, making sure I'm getting all of those, because that's the most important information I want to move with on this grid. And I'm seeing all, so these are my kicks up here, just so those of you who are watching, and these are my snares right here. And it looks like all of them are now selected. See, like right here, I don't want this one because there's no kick or snare there, so I'm actually going to take that out. And you can do that on any of these if you want to, if you wanted to. If there's parts that you don't want it to, like, you know, grid that hard, you can. And then we have one more, and we're good there. That one's on that. I'm gonna grab this one though, because that's a big hit. So now I know I have all my parts here and I have all my lines set up. So just make sure that this is something you want to make sure you get this right, because this is the most important part, is because once you've done that once, you're good to go through. We're going to be able to now go through separation, conform, and smoothing without having to do that again. And so now we're going to get this on the grid. So now I've got my clip separation. We've grabbed everything. It's captured, it's analyzed, we have that set. So now when I press separate, it's going to cut all of these sections. Now you can see it just did a ton of cuts, and every single one of these is now an individual little clip where that line was. So now you can see that. So this is a really fast way to chop up an entire section without having to go through and do it all by hand. Now the next thing I want to do is go to clip conform. So now that we have all this going on here, you can decide how, like standard just lets it be as it is, but usually you can come in and you can actually check these on the conform section and go to strength, and you can decide how strength is how strong this is going to move this to the grid. So if we want this to be locked on as hard as possible on the grid, then you want to put 100%. It's going to move it straight to the line. If you want it to just, still feel a little bit loose but tighten up, you can go down to 70%. If you want it to be really loose, you can go down there and it'll just tighten it up a little bit. Each of this percentage is just how close it's moving it to the actual target note that you're going for, which we're going to eighth notes right here. And then exclude within, this is just how close you wanted it to be into, how like this is, like you would exclude ones that are with, like if you did exclude 10%, this would move, like if you only wanted to move everything 90%, this would exclude anything that's within 10% of the front or the back of the note. So if we're on the quarter note and this note right here is within 10% of that line, then it wouldn't move when I do conform on this. So usually I'm usually not really dealing with exclude within, honestly. If I'm at this point and I'm going for actually time aligning this, then I'm just going to use the strength to what I think it should be. On this section, I'm going to move it super tight on purpose just so we can see 100%. And if that's the goal you're going for and you want it to be dead on the beat with it being super rigid, then 100% is what you want to do. So now you're going to see when I click conform, it's going to actually move all these individual clips that are sitting here. So now it actually moved these clips. Now on some of these spots we actually have like gaps. Like you can see we actually, like it's moved some where we actually have gaps because there's no crossfades right now. We always got to do crossfades, so we can actually see there's actually gaps that are happening when we do these movements. So now once we have got in here and we've cut it and now we've moved them onto time, now we can go to edit smoothing. Edit smoothing here, you have two options. Like at this point, as long as you haven't released your capture, you don't have to keep going back and clicking capture on each one of these things, as long as you leave Beat Detective up. So you have fill gaps, which fill gaps, all that would do is it's gonna, like when it says fill gaps, it's actually pulling the audio backwards and forwards over the top of each other, like just like you would manually drag it yourself, and it's filling the gaps with the audio that's under there, but they're just moved because of the cut. Now what we want to do with this is we want to use fill and crossfade, and what fill and crossfade is going to do is actually it's going to do that fill, and then it's actually going to set a crossfade, then it's going to crossfade all these marks for us. I'm going to set this at 10 milliseconds just because that's usually, I usually like to do like 20 most of the time when I'm on stuff, but on this I'm going to do it just tight on 10 milliseconds right here. So now when I hit smooth, you're going to see it's going to fill and crossfade all these gaps. So now when I go zoom in, we see we have crossfades at all these areas. I no longer have any gaps. All my clips are, you can literally see they are on the click now, and we have a very tight drum kit now. So now what we need to do is we need to listen and make sure it sounds like we want it to. Oh, I need to mute this bass because now it's definitely not going to be on time that we just timed since we just moved it. So now if I play, they sound super on. And we can see like even all those little steps before he was just a little bit kind of stuttery on his punches that he was doing on some of those little lead-in kicks, and now they're super tight and on time. Like so if I turn on my metronome like and play with this, you're gonna hear that he's gonna be dead on now. So now we're very tight, like we've done this whole section and it is super tight to the groove now. If we actually, like if we left that section, which now that section's good and time edited, like if we go to the next section, like if I start playing this section, like some of this stuff he's pretty good on time, but like I said, most of his stuff he was really on, but you can hear on some of the sections, like even before. Like some of it's on, but some of it's just a little bit draggy and pushy. But you can see like there's a lot going on in that with all these little 16th triplet, like little 16th note spurts that he's doing. And that's something I'm likely going to handle manually because I want to make sure that they're really tight. And the reason why I say that, because some of these, I'll show you why. Because like when I zoom in, like this one would be great to do that on because his timing is spaced exactly how it should be. But this timing right here, even though it's supposed to be the same type of thing, he's longer on this note and this one's really short, so it's likely going to push them where it's not doing the exact timing that I want. So I usually on little ones like this where it's not like perfectly like played, I'll go in and manually do it so it gets but any section that I can come through and do beat detective with, I will try to do it because it just saves you so much, time. And make sure and going section to section is definitely the big thing. So you can see like I did that section, I did the next thing. I mean, for the most part, like if I was doing this pretty quick, I could probably do each section, in under 5 minutes. So you can, hopefully edit drums in, in about half an hour to an hour if depending on how much drums are in there. Some drums are very simple. Like this is a pretty busy drummer. If you have somebody that's doing very straightforward beats, then you can probably do this. You could probably do this pretty quick in reality. So this also gets rid of all the clicks and pops. So that's the main form of beat detective. So drums is usually in transient materials the main thing I'm usually trying to always use this for. Now the other thing you can use it for guitars or bass. Like I said, you got to be very careful on that. Like I've used it on guitars before, like when I'm like on some stuff when I'm trying to time align where they're doing very fast notes, like on chugs where it's like a 16th, and you have very, very strong transients that are popping up all the way across. And then I'm doing those to time align to make them very tight. I'll just show you like in a really quick section here, just because you can do beat detective on these as well. Now again, you got to look and see what the note timing is that he actually has, which we can see he does have eighth notes in here just by his transient leading in right here, because these two notes are happening. So he has a little bit of note there, so you can actually, if you decided you wanted to do this inside the bass, you can do the same thing. Capture selection, now it's capturing the new selection. I can analyze it, and now we'll see that it's gonna let me grab those transients just like I did on the other one. Now, again, you just wanna make sure it's actually doing everything you want. So then if we wanted to do that, we can separate it, do clip conform, can conform at 100% if we really want to. So see, like on that, this may not be sitting where I necessarily want it to, and that's why you gotta be really careful with these. But that's now with the fill and crossfade, it's sitting. God, okay, let me turn XOR solo off. I can't turn these two on together. See, it actually moved it a little off the grid, so I would have to move it back. That's why I'm saying on instruments, you want to be very careful when doing that. A lot of times with instruments, you can see where they're, like if they were behind on something for like a large section, like, okay, he's kind of, if he was pushing slightly this whole scenario behind, and then you see that you can see he's a little bit, like let's say like this whole section was a little bit behind, and that's pretty close to that. You could technically, like manually, I could cut this and then just slightly move, that section to where I want it to be, and it puts it closer to on time, and then you can do it that way. But that's just kind of me showing you a couple of different, like what you can do, because because you can use beat detective for more than just drums. Just the main reasoning for beat detective is to use the drums. So in summary on beat detective, we want to make sure that we check out all our drums, make sure we really look at the timing of everything that's in there, look at all the transients, what the beat he's trying to play, and if we need to put it on time, then you need to actually put all the drums in the tracks in a drum group so you can select them all. Then you need to select the section that you specifically want to work with, and then you can open Beat Detective and then choose the operation you want to do, and then make sure you always capture the selection every time you open Beat Detective, because otherwise it won't look, and it'll always show you what section you have grabbed when you select that. So now if I do capture selection, boom, it's showing where the...
Thanks everybody for watching. If you found this content useful, please like this video. It will tell YouTube to show it to others.
Puts the tempo up top. Groove template actually puts it on the Groove clipboard that you can use with the Quantize menu. Clip separation cuts the clips. Conform puts them onto the grid for whatever time you want it to be going on. And then edit smoothing, fills, and fill and crossfades allows you to fill those gaps and then automatically crossfade. You can also just use Beat Detective if you've made a ton of cuts and done a ton of manual cuts. Like I'll just do a couple just real quick, just so you can see what I mean. I need to turn on Transient Detective. So like, let's just say if I was doing these and I'm just doing several cuts manually, and and then I try to move them somewhere on the grid or any of that part. So like those moved right there. Now I have. And by the way, if y'all didn't know, whenever you grab a selection, if you press Command and 0 on the number pad, it moves it onto the grid. So that's all I did, is just press Command 0. This is how you can manually do it faster as well. But if I wanted to clip and conform that, I can actually just grab the section over that, open Beat Detective, do edit smoothing, capture selection, fill and crossfade, press smooth, and then it just automatically does it for me. So you can use this as a way to do fill and crossfade by yourself. If you're not actually moving stuff and you're just doing cuts, remember you can always do fades as well by just grabbing the section, pressing Command F, and then that opens the batch fade menu, and you can decide exactly what you want every fade to look like in there and decide the milliseconds and just click OK, and you can do clipping that way. But I just wanted to make sure you could know that you can actually use the smoothing and editing, fill crossfades and gaps with Beat Detective on any of these scenarios. So everyone, that is Beat Detective. I hope that helps you out and y'all know how to use this now. So now when you get in your productions and you need to do some time editing, hopefully this will help it be a lot quicker and a lot smoother, and you can get your tracks lined up for the ones that you need to. Remember, genre specific for only, or if you have MIDI TID grip, like MIDI templates that you need to stay on, just make sure it's something that you need to do before you go in and just time align drums. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope you all have a great rest of the evening and great weekend, and we will see you next time. Later.
Thanks everybody for watching. If you found this content useful, please like this video. It will tell YouTube to show it to others. If you are enrolled, please go to the Seminars tab on the my.trcoa website and take the quiz over tonight's lesson. And if you need to book one-on-one time with an instructor, text 512-231-0344. If you aren't enrolled, go to trcoa.edu to find out more information about what we do. Also, please post in the chat subjects you'd like to see for our upcoming live streams. And as always, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you guys on the flip side. Bye, everybody.